Hello, Dr. Collins again, and today I want to talk about interventions. Interventions are what happens when things don't go according to plan, whether that be behaviorally or academically. When students don't perform to standard, what are we going to do? Great question. Now, before we decide what to do, we have to look at where students are. Students fall into one of four categories. We're going to call them colors. The colors are blue, green, red, or yellow. What's the difference? I'm glad you asked. So, let's go behaviorally, then academically. Behaviorally, a blue student is the student that will behave if the teacher is not there. If the teacher walks out of the classroom and does not come back, this student is still going to do what he or she is supposed to do. If a student is green, that student is likely to behave according to expectation with minimal teacher intervention, with minimal teacher oversight. If a student is yellow, they are easily influenced. They have to know that there are consequences for inappropriate behavior because they are likely to be influenced by the red students, and the red students require frequent attention. And these are the students that do not care about the discipline plan. They do not care about the rules. They are going to do what they want to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. Academically, a blue student is the student who academically, they know the content before you teach it. I was a science teacher, specifically anatomy and physiology. And every now and then I would get a kid that knew more about my content area than I did. I taught primarily juniors and seniors. And there were some juniors and seniors that were just self-taught. They loved the content and they knew more than I do. Those are the blue kids. A green kid, the green kids are the students that are likely to pick the content up extremely easily. Once you teach it, they got it. The yellow kid, this is a student who struggles academically but not behaviorally, and with interventions, they are likely to get it. The red kid, they are not even trying to learn the content. And so here's what I need you to know. We have blue, we have green, we have yellow, and we have red. Look at it like this. If we say red are 5% of the kids, and remember that 5%, they're not going to do what they're supposed to do regardless of what you do. Regardless of what you say, they're not going to do it. The yellow kids, most of our students are going to fall between yellow and green. Yellow is they will do okay if they know what the boundaries are, if they know what the expectations are. If you are loose and if you're one way today and another day tomorrow, these kids will cause problems. They will go with the red kids. The green kids, again, this is probably so yellow, that's about 65% of your kids. Green is about 25% of your kids. They are likely to do right. The blue kids, they're going to do right regardless. That's about 5 too. Here's why I need you to know that. Because if you don't address the yellow kids, the red kids, if there are no consequences for the red kids, the yellow kids will act like red kids. And so whereas the red kids, they were not going to do right anyway, specifically behaviorally. They weren't going to follow the expectations anyway. If there are no consequences for the red students, then the yellow students will begin to act like the red students. And now you have about 70% of your class acting like a plum fool because there are no consequences. Consequently, if there are consequences for the red kids, then what will happen is the yellow kids will act like the green kids. And so now you have an overwhelming amount of students that are compliant because they know there are consequences. There have to be consequences. And if I'm being quite honest, one of the challenges in education right now, specifically in the public school, is there just aren't consequences. I am not against restorative justice. I am not against giving kids opportunities, but that can't be instead of consequences. It has to be in lieu of consequences. Let me say that again. Right now, we're big on restorative justice, and I promise you, I am as restorative as anybody you know. But restorative, I'll say it again, is not in lieu of consequences. It's in addition to consequences. Because when there are no consequences, our yellow students begin to act like our red students. There have to be consequences. Now, let's go back to this concept of intervention, which is what I first started talking about. What I'm going to tell you is not how most people teach it, but this is after 28 years of education, most of them in administration. Here's how I see the tiered level of behavioral and academic intervention. Intervention, there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 is the classroom level and the teacher is responsible for it. Tier 2 is at the campus level, and campus administration, they are responsible for making sure it gets done. Now, it may be a counselor that implements the tier 2, but it's at the administration level that makes sure it happens. Tier 3 is the district level, and there needs to be district support. So let's go to behavioral tier 1, 2, and 3 first. Then we'll deal with academic. Behaviorally, tier 1, there must be effective classroom management and effective classroom instruction. And they aren't separate. Instruction is not apart from classroom management. They must be together. As a matter of fact, if you don't have effective instruction and relevant instruction, it's almost impossible to have effective classroom management. If you don't have effective classroom management, it doesn't matter how good your instruction is. The two go hand in hand. And at that tier 1 level, it is the teacher responsibility. So if we implement a good tier 1 behavioral plan, what that means is there are consequences at the teacher level. What might the consequences be? A phone call home, a conversation with the teacher. I might change your seat. Those are 3 great tier 1 interventions. I might assign this student a lunch detention in my classroom for a period of time. Don't take the kids' whole lunch. Take 10, maybe 15 minutes. What I'm trying to say is at the tier 1 level, it is the teacher's responsibility. And if kids are not compliant, then what we must do is change the seat, have a conference, one-on-one conference with that student, make a phone call home. If you do not do tier 1, it is almost impossible for these campus administration to do tier 2. Because what happens, oftentimes teachers want the administration to come down hard on the student when the teachers have not implemented a good tier 1 intervention plan. So here's what happens. I'll get a write-up. A teacher will come to me and say, Johnny's messing up. I call home and Johnny's mom says, why is this the first time I'm hearing about it? That puts administrators in a bad position. And that's why, teachers, it is important that you implement good tier 1 behavioral interventions before you send it to the office. Now, of course, if a kid is fighting or if a kid curses you out, obviously, that's escalated to tier 2. But if a kid is just misbehaving in class, it is important that you implement those tier 1 models. And again, phone call home, change the seat, have a one-on-one conference so that when it gets to tier 2, which is at the campus level, when I call home as the principal, I can say, now listen, Miss Smith has called home. Miss Smith has changed Johnny's seat. Miss Smith has talked to him, and Johnny is still not compliant. So now at the tier 2 level, what am I going to do? I may put Johnny in ISS. I may do that. I may even suspend Johnny. I may do that. But also I'm going to be restorative. What does that look like? We're going to implement restorative practices. I'm not going to say, Johnny, what did you do? I want to know, Johnny, what happened? Johnny, what happened to you that caused you to behave like that? Because you never know. There may have been an issue in Johnny's life that Johnny did not know how to deal with. Let me give you an example. When I first started teaching, I'll never forget it. A kid walked in the classroom. Another kid stepped on his shoe. The kid whose shoe got stepped on, he beat the mess out of the kid who stepped on his shoe. Broke up the fight. I'm like, dude, what is going on with you? Why did you go off like that? He was like, I didn't know. It was in the refrigerator. I just drank it. I said, wait a minute. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you just put your hands on this kid for stepping on your shoe. He said, Coach Collins. They called me Coach Collins because I was a coach. He said, Coach, I got up this morning. There was orange juice in the refrigerator. I drank it. My mom's boyfriend got up and punched me because I drank his orange juice. It was in my mom's refrigerator. I thought I could drink it. So here's what happened. He punched the boy. He beat the boy down. And it wasn't because the boy stepped on his shoe. It was because he didn't know how to deal with the fact that his mom's boyfriend beat him up for drinking orange juice that was in his mom's house. And so there has to be a consequence. But now there's a deeper issue here. We have to talk to this kid about how do you deal with things of that nature. We need to bring mom in. Mom needs to know what's going on. There is a deeper issue is what I'm saying. Anytime there are behavioral problems, there's oftentimes a challenge with that kid. There is something going on with that kid, and oftentimes there's something going on in that kid. There's a strong need for social emotional intervention and not just consequences. Hear me well. I am not against consequences. I'm simply saying it can't just be a consequence, because if all I do is give you consequences, I will continue to give you those same consequences over and over, because consequences don't stop the behavior. They don't change the behavior. It's the dialogue, it's the conversation, it's the social emotional intervention that helps the kid to understand what's going on in them and with them, and giving them strategies to deal with what's going on in them that will change behavior. And again, I'm not saying don't give a consequence, because if you don't give a consequence, those yellow and sometimes those green kids will act like the red kids. So we're going to implement restorative practices. I want to know what happened to you. I'm going to ask that kid, who was negatively affected by what you did? I'm going to ask that kid, how can we make it right? I'm going to ask that kid, what are we going to do if this happens again? What we're doing, we're reflecting, we're processing, we're coming up with an action plan to, one, make the issue right. You punched that kid, you owe that kid an apology. If it happened in a teacher's classroom, you owe that teacher an apology. And we also have to figure out, what are we going to do if this happens again? Because unfortunately, it just might. So let's start processing how to deal with anger, how to deal with disappointment. Let's start processing this, because these are life skills that this kid is going to need, not just for the here and now, but also for the future. I may assign this kid a mentor. And mentors don't just have to be other teachers. Listen, maximize your office staff. Do you realize there are some secretaries, there are some campus supervisors, there are security personnel that are amazing with kids, and the kids love them. Use every person in that school as a potential mentor. There are cafeteria workers and janitors who have great relationships with kids. Maximize those relationships. Use those individuals as mentors, because sometimes those individuals, those support personnel, they can relate to kids better than you can, better than I can. And it is important to find someone who can relate to that kid and talk to that kid on his or her level, regardless of their position. Who cares about the position? I want to know, can you get through to this kid? And I'm telling you, there are support staff on your campus that can get through the kids better than you and I both. That's tier 2. Tier 3, let's say the teacher has changed seats, has called home, has had one-on-one conferences. The kid is still not responding. Let's say that you've given that kid a mentor. Let's say you've put that kid in restorative circles. Let's say you've even suspended that kid or put them in in-school suspension. The behavior is still not changing. Now it's tier 3. Tier 3 is the district level. And we need district support for this kid. From the behavioral perspective, we might need to consider an alternative placement. Yes, alternative school. Every kid does not need to be in the public school. Let me tell you what happens when you keep all kids in the public school. And I know there's a big push. No, don't suspend kids. Don't have ISS. Don't have alternative schools. Here's what happens when you don't give out consequences to students that need consequences. Other kids get the understanding that no consequences are given regardless of what you do. And so now they become those red kids. That's why we have to give them consequences. There are times that students need to be removed from campus and placed in an alternative setting. And it's not always just about that kid. It's about the other kids that see that kid messing up. Those other kids, they know that kid needs to go. And when we don't put that kid in an alternative setting for a period of time, we actually reduce the morale on campus, because now teachers and students, they feel like this is the Wild Wild West. There are no consequences for anybody. You want to know why teachers are so frustrated? They love kids. They love education. They love teaching. They can't deal with the lack of consequences for kids that obviously need consequences. When we put that kid in an alternative setting, we let everybody know, if you're not going to follow the rules, there are consequences. Now, again, we're not going to get rid of this kid forever. There's a period of time, in my opinion, about a semester, and then bring them back. Here's the way I look at it. If it's before the halfway point of the semester, we put them in for the remaining part of that semester. If it's past the halfway point, we have to make a decision. We can either put them in for just the remainder of that semester or the remainder of that semester and the next semester. But there have to be consequences. Let me take it a step further. When they go to the alternative campus, it can't just be academic. There has to be a huge social, emotional push. We have to talk to these kids about conflict management, conflict resolution, anger management. We have to get through. We have to bring in outside organizations to fill in those gaps because they got in the problems because of something that was either happening to them or in them. We need to help them realize what's going on and help them deal with it. So again, in an alternative setting, it can't just be academic. There has to be a social, emotional component where we help kids understand what's going on in them, why they're acting the way they're acting, and hopefully give them some resources to adjust their behavior. This is how we help kids. So the alternative setting is not just punitive. It has to be restorative. I'm not just sending you away to send you away. I'm putting you in an alternative setting to give you more social, emotional education because we typically don't do that in the traditional public school setting. We give them the academics, and typically it's an online curriculum, but we also give them some restorative practices to help them understand what's going on, help them learn how to deal with what's going on in them. That's behavior. Let's talk about academic. Academically, again, we need effective instruction, effective classroom management. If that's not working, what do? We might move to small group instruction. We need to offer tutoring. We need to offer after-school services, before school and after school. We need to offer supplemental resources to these students in small groups, right? And so we do that and through small groups, through tutoring, through after school. Hopefully we can help the student catch up because here's the deal. Everybody doesn't get it at the same time. There's going to be a kid who's going to understand the Pythagorean theorem the first time you say it. There's another kid who needs to hear it 4 or 5 times, but when they get it, they got it. So we need to offer opportunities for them to hear it 4 or 5 times, and that might be in a small group setting. I know some people are against ability groupings, and I'm not saying every time we group kids, we group them in ability groupings, but there are times they need to be in ability groupings so that the kids that are advanced, we can have a curriculum that's advanced for them, and the kids that are behind, we can address them also so that they can catch up, right? Let's say that we've given them interventions, we put them in small groups, they've come for after school tutoring, they've come at lunchtime and they're still not getting it. Because again, that's level 2, the campus level. You know, the principal needs to set up after school tutoring, make sure teachers are doing it. The principal needs to go by and make sure teachers are implementing small group instruction. That's tier 2. Tier 3, we might look at a potential 504 or SPED accommodation. We might need an IEP. We might need to see what's going on because the kid might need other services. Now, here's the biggest challenge I'm going to say. If a kid is not trying, we cannot say a kid needs an IEP if they're not trying. Because if they're not trying, we don't know what they can do. A kid has to put forth effort. If they refuse to put forth effort, how can we, in all good faith, say this kid needs an IEP? I think we do kids a disservice when we just give them 504s or IEPs when they're not putting forth effort. Now, if they put forth the effort and they show us that they don't understand it, they may need a 504. They may need an IEP, but the effort has to be there before we give a kid an IEP or put them or put them in SPED or 504. So that's the academic and behavioral RTI. Here's what I'm saying. It is important to meet the needs of our students, and when things don't go according to plan, there has to be intervention. 3 levels of intervention. The first one is at the classroom level. Second one is at the campus level. That's tier 2. Tier 3 at the district level. It's both behavioral and academic. And if we are not following the tiered process, parents don't understand what's going on because they're not being kept informed. And it's not just those kids that are being hurt. The other kids are being hurt because, one, we're either not providing the academic resources that students need, or we're not providing the disciplinary consequences and social emotional learning that kids need. Let me back up real quick. In tier 2 academics, this is also where we get intervention classes. What I've done as a principal, I've set up my master schedule. I should have said this, but it escaped my mind. But tier 2 academically, sometimes kids need intervention classes. I'm against remedial classes, because if we keep a kid in remediation, when do they catch up? I think we need intervention classes that go concurrently. So let's say they're bad at algebra. We're going to put them in algebra, and we're also going to put them in an algebra support class. Because remember, I said somebody's going to get the Pythagorean theorem the first time you say it. Someone needs to hear it 3 or 4 times. The kids that need to hear it 3 or 4 times, put them in the intervention classes so they can hear it 3 or 4 times. They hear it in the Algebra 1 class, then they hear it again in the intervention class. And so now, because they're getting a double dose of it, now they can stay up to date with it. I want to challenge you. In the intervention class, it is important to differentiate the instruction. If we just sit them down on a computer program, or if we just sit them down and give them a worksheet, it won't work. We have to differentiate. What do I mean? Get them up. Have station rotation. Let them go around. Give them relevant questions. Let's say if we want to calculate speed. Instead of saying, John took a train from point A to point B, he got there in 2 hours, how fast was he going? No, ask them. If you could take a trip anywhere in the state, where would you go? When they give you that answer, tell them, see how many miles it is from point A to point B. If you're going 55 miles an hour, how long will it take you? Make the questions relevant. Relevant questions get results, because now kids understand why they're doing it. That's tier 2. That's effective instructional practices. This is Dr. Collins. Hopefully I've helped you understand a little bit more about tier 1, 2, and 3 interventions, both academically and behaviorally. See you next time.